Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is One Day Today. We are on episode 84 and going strong. So, if you had one thing to share that you knew would make the difference in somebody else's life, what would it be? Here at One Day, we really assert and stand that we all have gifts. We all have gifts to share. And, all our neighbors, whether you live right next door or right across the world, we all have gifts to receive. And we all have things in our lives that, you know, block us and are barriers to our own experience of the gifts that we have to share. And that's why we hold this space, is to really have people who are just up to extraordinary things, despite whatever's happening in the world, whether there's pandemic, whatever trauma or tragedy, the world or communities are facing. There's still people lifting others up. There's still people who are supporting those who need support. And it's, for me, it's been humbling because every day we have an episode. Not only do I learn something, but I receive the gifts of just amazing people who are just committed to things much greater than themselves. And that's really the space we hold here, is to really share your gift. And you have a unique, from your circumstances, from your experiences, from what you've gone through in your life, what fears, what trials, what tribulations have held you back and kept you, maybe you felt lost, maybe you felt alone or stuck, but somehow, some way, on the other side of that, you discovered yourself to be powerful, to stand, to find, you found on the other side of your trauma was wisdom. And that's what the space is for. We want to share the wisdom that you discovered that allowed you to thrive in the middle of chaos, in the middle of being the world holding you back. You still found a way to shine through. And it's really, I really solely believe and wholly believe that, the beauty in our humanity, we can really discover and share like diamonds under pressure. It's like we are like diamonds and pearls. It's under the pressure that we face in our lives that allows our beauty to shine through when we thrive in the face of them. And that's what we're holding in this space, is just to share the beauty and the gift that you are, that we all have. And it's something that there are no exceptions to that. It is, I have never seen an exception. Everybody has something to contribute to us all. And that's why I'm just always thrilled and excited to just to have the space and to share the gifts that you have with me and with the world. And it's just a privilege and honor to be here. I'm really excited about our guest today. But first, let me welcome our co-host, Matthew. Matthew, how you doing today, brother?
It's a good day. It really is. Things are flowing, and you stated, like, you started with, we here at One Day assert, and that got me going down this path of creativity and manifestation, and as you said, realizing our power. And to me, that power is creativity, right? To be able to create from nothing, with just imagination. Um, and it starts with an assertion or a declaration. You know, Even just saying I am a creator makes me a creator,
Mhm.
which is, for me, really fun to play with. Like I kind of play with
Yeah.
it all the time. But I noticed this in particular because a friend of mine, she's traveling right now, and she was joking that she was destined to meet someone on the plane, but she said it as a bit of an assertion.
Yeah.
And so she landed the other day, and she messaged me, and she's like, "So I met somebody on the plane." I was like, "Yeah." I kind of was waiting on that to happen. She goes, "Yeah, we didn't like. It was like the universe was trying to make us talk. Like, there's just all these little things that happen that, like, create opportunities to speak, and we didn't. And then finally, she's like, "I'm leaving the airport. I'm going to my rental car, and we both get assigned to the same rental car." And so it's it's the same guy walking up after all these times, and like in that moment she's like, I just finally gave up, and apparently he did too, because like the very next thing was, okay, just put your number in my phone. Clearly there's something going on here. Let's talk. But like that is the power of assertion and manifestation. Like that's it right there. And I asked her what she felt her lesson was. And the big one was stop ignoring how powerful I am, is what she said. Like I can't create this stuff. And like that resonated pretty deeply. But the flip side of that, I feel like, is also, I feel like every single person that comes into our life has something to teach us, and we have something to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
And learning that lesson can take 5 minutes or an entire lifetime. But what I've noticed is people do not leave my life until that lesson is complete, whatever that happens to be, on both sides. And so the question I left for her, and this is the kind of the question I leave for everybody who's listening, like everyone who's here will see this show, is who in your life have you not learned the lesson from, and what have they not learned from you? Like, I find that question to be very insightful and inspiring. Like, it constantly promotes growth and change and reflection, and because I'm constantly looking for something to learn.
Yeah.
So we are powerful creators.
I love that. And I think it kind of reminds me what one of our guests on last week said. Earl was saying, the to your point of like the power we have as creators is it works both ways, because we could say, I am going to meet someone on a plane that's going to teach me a lesson, or we could say, I am not. Yeah. And very much deprive that out. It's like it works both ways. We can define, and it's like the context we set up with our own language. It's like, physical objects exist in space and time, while possibilities exist in language. And it is the language that we use to assert, to declare. And it's like where we will see, it's like, if I say, oh, today is going to be a terrible day, you better bet that I'm only going to notice the things that are going to make it a terrible day. And if I say today is going to be a beautiful day, I'm going to notice the things that make it a beautiful day. And it's like, it is the context of our language that allows us to notice whether or not we take responsibility for it. We create our experience based on our framing of our language.
And like learning to notice how that framing has been structured in our lives as we've grown up can be some of the most freeing experiences I think are possible. Like, to be able to recognize the structure that language has created in our lives, just simply by the story that already exists in this world, and then being able to break that down and create something new, create an entirely new framework that is completely outside anything the society or world has taught us.
Yeah, I love it, and I will now, before I welcome our guest, I will assert, and I'm going to invite anyone who's watching. When you wake up tomorrow, or maybe just in the next 10 minutes, or whenever you see this, to say, I will make an impact in somebody's life today. I will learn something today that I didn't know that will allow me to grow and allow people around me to grow. And I challenge you all to do that. And I just I invite you to imagine, what if everybody in the world chose to say that on the same day? What would that make available for you, for me, for for your family, for our community? And it's like, this is our invitation at One Day. It's like, today we all choose to be the creators of a new world and a new paradigm that not only works for us all, but we can all thrive and share and receive the gifts of all.
Oh, absolutely.
So on that note, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome our guest, Jeff Ross. Welcome, Jeff. So happy to have you.
Thank you, Abram. Nice to be here. Nice to be here with both of you.
Thank you for
It's
joining.
our pleasure. It's our pleasure and honor. We met, I think, a few weeks ago, and I'm really excited for you to share your story and what you're up to and the impact you're making. And I'm just excited. I'm just going to say, Jeff, if you're ready, the stage is yours.
Thank you. As you were saying, you were talking about language and the details of language, the power of language. As I was thinking after we talked, Abram, about what I might share in this context, two words frame what I was thinking, which is to be interesting and to be interested. And I'll explain that through the starting back when I was 15 years old. I was a street juggler. I learned to juggle, and I started juggling, and I performed on the streets. And it was really very good to be a juggler in high school because people noticed it. It was a little more exotic than it is now, perhaps, and it was a great way to make some money. I would perform on the streets, and I was really sure that being interesting was what was keeping me alive, and it was. And I went into performing professionally and was a juggler and an acrobat and a clown and an actor, all of which are about being interesting in the world. And I took that into my personal life. I would be happy to talk a lot about how interesting I was. And sometimes I noticed that that wasn't landing. You know, that is, people are asleep. You may start to notice that. As I worked, I started to find there were times when I would be in a situation that was just too interesting to ignore. So one of the first times that happened, I got a job in Alaska at the Alaska State Fair with a group I used to work with, and we're talking about the late 70s now. And we had a job working at the Alaska State Fair and then traveled around Alaska in the fall, and it was wonderful. Out of that, I got 9 other jobs over the next decade plus, coming up in the middle of winter to Yupik Eskimo villages out on the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. That's pretty interesting. One day it got down to negative 113 degrees with the wind chill. That's interesting and deadly. And just being immersed in this culture, this Yupik culture, which I knew nothing about until I got there, was just fascinating. And we would perform when we got to the village, then we'd teach the kids all week, and then we would perform a show with the kids. We'd put a show together at the end of the week. And over the times, I was up there the first time for I think it was 9 weeks, and then the next time for a month. And so getting up there, I started to learn something of the culture with my colleagues and get very interested in the stories from Yupik culture and start to integrate them into the shows, which was interesting in itself. What I found even more interesting is that there's a bunch of stories we weren't allowed to hear. There's layers and layers of another culture that I didn't even know could be there. So in one village when we were just getting this idea, it was actually a village called Eek, and the custodian for the school, who is usually the person who's got the most respect in the village. It's one of the better jobs in these little villages. We're talking 100 to 300 people total in the village. This janitor kind of came to each of our classes during the day, which he had never done before. And we noticed when we asked the kids, can you tell us a story from your culture? I'm interested. The kids would quick look over at him. And they would say, I could tell you, and they'd name a story, and they'd look at him again. And I didn't see what he did, but clearly he was telling them either, yes, you can tell that story, or no, you're not telling that story. So I found another layer about my profession, telling stories, but in that context. A number of years later, I was hired at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, which for a kid from Berkeley, California, is as strange as Eek, the Yupik village on the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. And the University of Nebraska at that point had an amazing program where it was called the Artist Diversity Residency Program. And so they brought in artists from all over the country you had to be an artist who was using some part of your cultural background in your art. And I, at that point, had a solo show about my father, who was a soldier in World War II, American soldier. We're Jewish. He signed up when he was 16 saying, I'm going to go save my race, to my aunt, his little sister. And it was a story about a trip I took to Europe, particularly to Germany. I toured in Dachau, and I started to wonder if my father, who was a photographer in the war, had taken some of the pictures at the Dachau Museum. And that led, as it does, if you're an artist, things lead to another. And if you're a working artist, making your living on it, you start to go, oh, wait, there's something here. And I started to put that together with my mentor, a man named J.O. Wiseman. So I had this piece that was based on my cultural background, and I took it to Nebraska, and I would do scenes from it in different classrooms, and then talk to the students afterwards about my life being a Jewish artist. And they were not very interested. Some were, but there's a kind of quiet, kind of silence that can happen in Nebraska that it's a pretty strong silence, a pretty stubborn silence. And I had not experienced that before, and I was getting pretty frustrated. My boss in Nebraska, a woman named Kit Voorhees, was a brilliant woman, still is a brilliant woman. And after a particularly bad question and answer, which wasn't a question and answer, it was an answer. It was me talking. She said, Jeff, you might want to ask them questions, see what they can say. And that was a revelation. I would finish and I would ask a question of the audience, and I would make it a point not to put more of myself in there, not to try to be interesting after the show. The show, I hope, was interesting, but let me be interested for a while. Let me listen to the audience. And I got a lot of stories. And I learned a little bit how to be on stage, the center of attention, and still be interested. I did a gig when I got back from one of my trips to Nebraska where I was invited to come to a place in San Francisco. It was a senior center, and this particular group were all survivors of the Holocaust. And the person who booked me said, well, talk about these experiences you had taking your play to Nebraska. They'll be really interested in that. They were not in the slightest bit interested in that. They thought I was from Nebraska. They wanted to know why I was here. What was I talking about? And I found myself in front of a bunch of people who, I mean, they're survivors of the Holocaust. They're not just my people. They're the people I am most interested in my world. And they were not happy. They were ready to go eat lunch. So I got desperate. And my older son was pretty little back then. And so I just said, before they were like getting ready to get on their walkers and head out to lunch, I said, but excuse me, before you go, I have a question for you. My son's 2 years old, and I want him to know about history, about our history, even a horrible history. And as I said, my father never talked about the war, even though he fought it. What should I do? How should I tell him? So 15 old folks sat down, and I sat down, and they started explaining, how do you teach your kids? And they had a great time. They thought I was wonderful. I had a great time. They focused, by the way, in case you want to know, they focused almost entirely on the Seder service. They said the Seder service is built there. That's the Passover service, where you talk about the history, you tell the history, you relive the history, you eat the history, you sing the history, you pretend that Elijah's at the door, so you act out the history. It was it was wonderful. They had to finally ask me to leave so that they would stop talking and go to lunch. A number of years later, I was running a school for professional clowns called The Clown Conservatory in San Francisco. And it was going well. And I invited an old mentor and friend of mine, Avner Eisenberg, to come teach a guest slot for my students. And while he was out, Avner took me out to lunch. He said, Jeff, it's not so good here for you, is it? And I said, what do you mean? I got 2 healthy kids and happily married, and I'm running a school. It's the only school of its kind in the country. What do you mean? He goes, I know, but here you're kind of a big shot. You can't suck. You got to be good all the time. What's wrong with that? I can be good. He said, no, you need to suck, Jeff. Listen, I'm teaching a workshop in Maine this summer. Come, you just come for room and board. I won't even charge you, but you could suck. It's 2 weeks. You can suck for 2 weeks. And as you might imagine, I didn't think that was such a great sales job, but I went home and I thought about it. I talked to a few people and I signed up. And boy, did I suck. I gotta tell you, I was never a great student, even back when I was in theater school, when I was younger. I was a terrible student. And because Avner had framed it in that way, Jeff, come and suck, I felt bad about it for a few days, and then I started embracing it. One of my former students was in the class, and she just kept staring at me. And I think that her entire education would flash before her eyes and go, I have to ignore all this. But I was having a great time. And in the final show, I worked with a guy I had performed with who's brilliant. And I kind of rode his coattails, so I had a little bit of buoyancy at the end. Well, right before our final dinner, I got a call from my lawyer, and he'd finished negotiating a year-long contract to play the lead in a show with Cirque du Soleil, where I could be on stage and be really interesting and get paid decently for it. Well, when I announced that at the final dinner, everybody just looked at me like, you got to be kidding me. And I laughed and I said, no, it's true. And I did 500 shows with Cirque du Soleil in the show called Corteo. And it was my fight every show, every one of those 500 shows before I went on. I had to ask myself, do you want to try to be interesting today? Which is what everything, people are paying hundreds of bucks to see. There's thousands of people out there. Be interesting. Everyone around you is interesting. Or do you want to do what's right, which is to be interested? And luckily, the director of that show, Daniele Finzi Pasca, was very into performers staying interested in each other, in the lighting, in the audience, in the band, in the props. So every day, every one of those 500 shows, I committed to being interested, not interesting. And I have to thank Avner for giving me the language for that particular quote. Be interested, not interesting, is his. And he finally gave me the language for something that I've been looking at for a while. And I just want to finish this little piece because a year plus ago, back when live performances were happening, I was asked to come do some solo shows for a dear friend, Tandy Beal, who's a choreographer, circus director in Santa Cruz, just south of where I am in Alameda, California. 45-minute solo show. I was, oh boy, I don't have the skills that I had before. I was an acrobat for a long time. And so I put together a 45-minute show where the audience did most of the work. And I was a little embarrassed, but I said, well, it's the only way I'm going to get through these shows. And I did the first one, and I seriously was in the audience half the time, looking up at the stage. I gave somebody something to do, and they would go on the stage. In the ending, I had anyone in the audience who wanted to go up there, which included someone and his grandchild. There was a young man who had Down syndrome who went front and center, and then there were some tiny little kids, and they did a giant scarf juggling act. And I sat in the audience and cued them and cheered. And at the end, I was signing books. I've written a number of books about the world I've been in, their auto fiction. And I was signing books, and a bunch of people came up and said, "Oh, you were so good." And I was happy, but I thought, actually, you were good. I didn't do much. And driving home from Santa Cruz, it's about an hour and a half drive. That's when that idea settled in. The beauty of being interested. And if you're interested, you get a lot of love on the back end, a different kind of love than being interesting. In this case, people actually thought I was interesting, even though it was them doing all the work. So I think I'll stop there. I have a little coda that I want to add to that ending. Is at another show where I was working with a group, also for Tandy Beal, but working with a group. And I was selling my first book, The Secret Life of Clowns. And then I had my new book, which is called The Snow Clown. And a woman came up with her son. And the boy was about 8 or 9. And he came up and he was looking intently at the books. And she picked up my new book and she said, "He loved your first book, so I want to buy the second book for him." And I said, "Oh, this second book has some language in it that might not be appropriate." And I wanted to tell her it may not be perfect for a 10-year-old. And she goes, "Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. He doesn't read. He just wants to take home something of you." And the boy picked up the book and he just held it to his chest, and I signed it for him. And he ran his hand over the signature and then walked away with it held to his chest. And I just had this moment of understanding that I don't really know what's going on in anyone's head when I'm trying to be interesting. I only know when I'm interested what's going on with them, and then the world opens up in a whole different way.
Wow, that's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
All of that, Jeff. I really, that's a powerful distinction, between interesting versus interested. And it's like what it reminds me of is, it's funny. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. I feel like it's the same lesson in a different context. I've been a career musician, a performer as well. And end of 2018, I kind of naturally put my touring on the shelf to kind of follow an existential inquiry, of searching for myself and something greater than myself that, long story short, ended up is why I'm here now. But
right.
I digress. One of the I ended up finding myself addicted to learning swing dancing. And it was only because I had this free time, this free space, and I was experimenting, and I didn't know why. It was like this, I'm going to try it because I'm curious, and I didn't really know what to expect. And one of the things I learned, and I've learned when I started doing swing dancing, because obviously in dancing, there's leaders and there's followers. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my leadership is from my experience of dancing is the best, as it is in dancing, such also is in life, is the best leaders are not to like, hey, everybody look at me and I can do this trick and I can do this, I can do this and I can do that. The best leaders get out of the way and allow their followers to shine and it's not about leadership. It's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about them. It's about people out there. And I think it's the same thing. It's like being interested. It's not about me. It's about what is the impact? Who are they and how can I contribute to them? And it's like, and I feel like it's the same principle, when we can get out of the way of trying to make the glory about us. It's like, look at me, look how interesting I am, and see, I can do this and I can do that. And it's like when we're in their world, when we can make them smile, when we can make them laugh, when we can make them feel, it's like you're saying, it's a whole different kind of love, and it's a different kind of impact. Yeah. And I just love how you put that. It's just like, because when we focus on them being in their world, that how can I be interested in them? It's tenfold. It's like, because not only are they receiving an impact, not only are they entertained, but they get like the child that you just said, who got the book, and you give them a piece of you that they will never lose and they will always cherish, and it's a moment that it is an experience that is greater than, than any small, like, flashy gimmick or trick that could be interesting.
That's yes, exactly. And I love flashy gimmicky tricks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Well,
not that goes away. Part of me telling that is so I remember it. You know what I mean? It's
right. Absolutely. And I think that's the good point, because I feel like how much effect a flashy gimmicky trick has when you're coming from the space of being interested, I feel it has more of an impact, because like it's coming from you contributing to them.
Yeah.
It's not just to like convince them to like you or to be, look how great I am, look what I can do, look how great I am. It's like you're giving a piece of yourself to them. And I think that's ultimately leadership, and that is contribution. I think as an entertainer, that's the greatest gift you can give, is for someone to experience a bigger part of themselves from the gift that you give.
Yeah. Again, hard to remember, at least for me, but as we're sitting here talking about it, you go, yeah, that's beautiful. I know myself well enough to know that next time I'm on stage, or next time I'm even writing something, those flashy gimmicks will look real good.
Yeah, I love it.
Just a quick word of warning: my laptop is kind of acting up, so I may get kicked out of the studio briefly. But jumping on this conversation of the things that open up when we're interested versus when we're trying to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about some of the challenges you face from your own mind, like from your just overcoming your own self-doubts or your own fears, your own whatever it happened to be, that was stopping you or keeping you from being completely interested.
Well, I don't think I'm ever completely interested. And I get this idea. Yeah, you hit it. Your question is pinpointed well in my case, certainly, that the barriers to being interested in the ways that opened up the kind of things that Abram was just talking about are here. They're mental and emotional. So one of them is just how I conceive my job. Is my job to go out and wow the audience, or is my job to go out and connect and listen very carefully to them? So one thing, I mean, as a comic performer, as a clown or a juggler, acrobat, or even a comic actor, you learn all the different types of laughter, where you really get sensitive to laughter. When you get sensitive to silence and quiet is when you get into that other level of listening. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, sometimes I guess the answer is that I'll trick myself, is, give myself kind of ego strokes for being good at understanding different kinds of laughter, knowing in the other part of my mind, oh, he's listening. This is good. He's interested. I think that's part of it. I can say that having mentors who mark the moment, like when Avner named "Be Interested, Not Interesting," when Kit Voorhees said, "Let them start talking." These little moments that are, it's almost like drive-by coaching. It's really what it is very well distilled coaching. Those help so much because they got something to hold on to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, it's because it's the obstacles to, what you just said about silence is the next level. I mean, back to, my music career. It's like, it's funny because my creating music and performing music, came out of an identity that I discovered when I played music. Like before I ever performed, I discovered music was a way that I could reach people. Mm-hmm. And it was like, and it was kind of a thin line between egoic and fulfillment and connection. But I realized I created a persona being the front man of my band,
Right.
I would, how can I affect people? How can I impact people? How can I, but there's times where, I was afraid of the silence as a performer. It's like, oh no, they don't like me, or oh no, it's like I have to say something, or for years I wouldn't say anything to the audience. I was afraid to connect in fear of rejection and fear. So I would, I don't have my sunglasses, but I would hide behind a pair of sunglasses, so to speak. It's like, here I am, the front man of the band, and mysterious. And yeah, there you go. I'm mysterious and cool. And like, don't, but it's like, I could attract people to the music, to the mystery, which was would play into this egoic, interesting. But ultimately, the one I made the biggest impact, I feel, is when I was interested in them, when I could actually connect, and I could actually connect with them during or after the show, and just see how they're impacted, and how the music moves them, and what inspires them, and what they do, and what lights up their heart. And it's like, and it's ultimately that connection that you're speaking of, that the less I am afraid of the silence, the more I can embrace and use the space to connect. It's just like the impact that I can make is just astronomical compared to when I'm just trying to say, hey, everybody, look at me, look how cool I am. Look, here's this guitar solo, and here's that. It's just like, it's night and day, the impact, and how fulfilling it is to actually just, instead of being cool and to just look how great I am, to like, I love you, and I want to share with you and make you feel good. And I want to hear what makes your heart sing. And I want to hear what lights you up. And it's like, it's that relationship between the entertainer and the audience is sacred. And like, when you're really comfortable, like we were saying, when you're comfortable with that silence, when you're comfortable with being interested, that's when you can transcend. That's when you can stop time. That's when, like, I mean, for some reason, Charlie Chaplin comes to my mind. It's to talk about a great entertainer, and like how he could connect without ever saying a word, but how he, but just like how you can transcend time as an entertainer to, in the way the greatest art does, how we can experience something bigger than ourselves when art will just stop time, and it's just where we just have this feeling of wow, like, and it's just like, this person is making me feel, they're making me experience, they're making me laugh, they're making me cry, it's like, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. How did, you were talking about the seeing people before and after, right? Because there is, when you're on stage, there's the before, then you're on stage, there's a different engagement, and then you're after. How did those connections affect your performance? I imagine the sunglasses came off, but how did that? Because that really, there's a time when you meet people in a different way, but when you're on stage, there's literally a gulf between you, and then there's a sound gulf. There's a whole bunch of stuff, and it sounds like you managed to put those together somehow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a long touring career, and I think I could tell you stories in both ways, because sometimes I would literally hide behind sunglasses where I would still be, where I was so afraid of the approval or acceptance, where I would still come out as the character. It's like, nice to meet you, thank you for being here. But like, then there are times, but it's like, and this is where like the beauty of humanity, where especially touring, and I'm sure you've toured, in your experience of touring, you would experience this. You experience the most beautiful humans when you're on the road, out of your comfort zone, and you're literally living out of your suitcase. So it would be moments that humbled me, where I would break out of that shell, when there's just like people who, a lot of the times, like we'd be touring, for weeks, and we wouldn't necessarily have a place to stay that night, or, it would always be the situation. It's like, we're on to the next city. We don't know where we're staying yet. And we'd always meet somebody at a show who was like, hey, you guys want to come over? We have extra beds on the floor, or we got space in our basement. Well, we'll cook you breakfast. And it's just like, but it would be like them, like just their humanity reaching out to me, where I would break out of my shell, where it's like, where they're so honored and humbled and grateful to have somebody touring and playing music in their town, where they can actually experience that, where it's just like, where my ego, my identity could not compute, where I would have to take off the sunglasses. So it was a lot of the case. It was just like, I would be forced to be humbled by the the beauty and the humanity in the people, and just how open, just because of how affected and impacted they were by the performance and by how grateful they were for the music, it would just be like, I'm just so moved by who they are, that they're like letting a stranger in their, like a gang of strangers into their home. Like, it was just like, you just experience the beauty of humanity when people, just for no reason other than just how grateful they are for you to be in their town and to be performing, that it would just be like, wow, this is a beautiful, you just meet the most beautiful humans when you're traveling as a performer.
Yeah. It's also a good reason to tour in smaller areas.
Yeah.
I love touring through, touring through Alaska, you're in a tiny village of 300,
Right.
even touring
Absolutely.
through Wyoming, Idaho, touring in rural France. You're right. People are like, oh, you came here. All right. We welcome you.
Yeah. It was totally. Small towns that was where people were the most grateful. And it was like, two signal towns, like little, like small towns.
Oh, you were on the good tour. We did the one in the no signal town. We were on that tour. Okay, we see we're on different tours.
Yeah. But it's like, there's something to that. And that, honestly, that was, it was very much touring is very much the school of hard knocks. But I feel like a lot of my humility that I've learned and gained in my life is from those experiences of those people. When I am connected to people, when I am interested, and I built these lifelong relationships all over the world with people, they were literally strangers, and I performed for them, and I just, reach out to touch them, just with my music. But then eventually after, where we just make this connection, we'd build lifelong friendships. So every time we came back in that city, we'd see them again, and like they'd become like our long-term hosts. And I think there's that connection is so powerful, and it kind of reaffirmed not only the impact I can make, but it just gave me a deeper connection to why I'm doing it in the first place.
Yeah, it's nice.
You guys are both pointing at something that hasn't been said yet, and that is the state of beingness that gratitude can invoke. Like, and you're coming at it from two different directions too, which is really amazing. Like, Jeff, you're coming at it from like being interested, and in showing interest in the audience, they are grateful to you for being seen, and for like creating a space where they can be seen and heard and understood.
Literally put them up on stage.
Yeah, exactly. Like quite literally. Like it's that, and then that gratitude literally transforms the state of their emotions, the state of their beingness, to one of acceptance and awareness and openness and curiosity. And Abram, for you, it's the exact same thing. Only it was the audience inviting gratitude from you, and then so it's kind of amazing to me how like it can happen from either direction, right? But it's just a little bit of gratitude or a little bit of interest can change the entire situation in the space of the entire room.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to that. And it's, when it's funny, it's interesting, like full circle, now when I think of, like what led to my, my inquiry, that when I put my touring on the shelf, I was like asking those questions because I look back to these amazing people that I've met over the years and how grateful I am for how they supported me and allowed me to have a career in the first place. And now it's like, as I come full circle, as I'm, looking at touring again in the future and like what that will look like, it's like, it's that gratitude that fuels that. It is that gratitude that, that it's the impact. It's that being interested in them that fuels it. Like if I were to tour on a month-long, 2-month tour, again, it would be because of my interest for them. It would be because I not only see how much they contribute to me and my growth and to my allowing me to discover myself, but it's a gift that keeps on giving. And I think that's connect. It is a dance. It is a connection. And when I can be intentional with the impact I make and like why I create art in the first place, why I perform, it's not about me making a living. It's not about people liking me. It's about how can I leave them to experience themselves and something greater than themselves. And how can I be interested in connecting? How can I connect with them on a deeper level that we're both left as performer and audience in a greater place, in a bigger experience of ourselves and of the world.
What you were just saying about that cycle of, well, Matthew, you were talking about a cycle of gratitude, a cycle of rejuvenation, a cycle of energy. That's so important for young performers. Because you get burned out, as you know, and part of the burnout is that you're not part of the cycle. The way my partner and my clown partner, Diane Wozniak, and I, when we were getting burned out on touring, the way we would describe it is, we do a show, we create a wonderful community for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and then they all go out to eat, go home, they're talking, they're enjoying it, they're talking about the show, and we go back and watch HBO at the hotel. So that disconnect is almost the natural, unless you are consciously doing what you're saying, Abram, as a young artist, and thinking about that and thinking, wait a second, this is a mutual exchange of energy and gratitude, and that's precious, and how do I foster that and maybe even turn it into long-term? That, at least for me, didn't come into any part of my consciousness for a very long time. And it would be something certainly to teach young artists.
Yeah, that hit pretty hard, actually. I feel like you just nailed something that is very much missing from our society. And I don't know if this fits exactly. I'm curious how this resonates for you. But the word that comes is meaning. We don't have a meaningful existence. And that is something to me that feels very meaningful and thus fulfilling. And that does beg the question, so if that word resonates, what specifically did you, or maybe what was the first thing you saw about your work that was meaningful to you? And what is meaningful now? Has that changed? Is it grown? Is it something similar? But where is meaning for you in this moment?
It does resonate, this idea of meaning. I'm not sure I can answer your question as you posed it. So let me just take a try and see what we get. Early on, because I grew up in Berkeley, San Francisco Mime Troupe, one of the great political theater companies around, and a group that no one remembers, but the East Bay Sharks, who would do 2.5-hour plays in the middle of riots on Sproul Plaza. I lived in Berkeley at a time. It was really interesting to live in Berkeley, but politics was everywhere. So the early thought of meaning was a political meaning, as in political theater, but I was doing circus, and so there was a disconnect there. And so doing that show I'd mentioned that was about my father's called Fatherland, and then later, much later, writing about it, that's got meaning. It's got personal meaning, and it's got resonance with political events. And but it was only in there that I started to get the sense that there's another layer of meaning here. That is listening to the audience's story. Because if you're an artist, it's storytelling is part of you as an artist. I don't know if this is true for musicians, but it's true for storytellers. Your story is creating their stories. I'm telling a story, Abram, I'm telling a story that involves touring. You're going, yep, I know touring. And so there's another story. That's part of the beauty of it. So tapping into those other stories that I could actually listen to them. I always assumed those would just be later afterwards. So that was this level of meaning of, ooh, I want to hear what stories. And then when the meaning goes like this, like when I was a student at Del Arte up in Northern California, we were talking about it earlier. They were using Agent Orange from the Vietnam War. They brought it home. They were using it to defoliate the forest so that it kills the conifers, so that it kills the deciduous trees, so they can chop down the conifers. And there's quite a few. There's the Hupa, there's the town of Hupa, and the Hupa and the Yurok and the Korak Indians in that area who are still very vibrant communities, and we're getting decimated by the dioxin in Agent Orange. So the students in my class and I, there's only 15 of us or something, put together a show about this and started touring it. And we toured to Hupa. And it was a funny show. We were comic performers. And we played at Hupa and nobody laughed. Like nobody laughed at all. There was no laugh. And we at the end of the show, we're backstage. Can we go out the back door? They're going to kill us. They hated it. And finally, they were supposed to do a Q&A, and we came around, and we were like these scared little theater students. And somebody came forward and said, "We like the show, but for us, it's not funny." And he kind of pointed to a little girl who had a birth defect from dioxin and said, "See, that's not funny, but your show is good." And boy, that just, because I thought, whoa, the meaning is funny with this. And he was saying, "Now you're not funny, but you're talking about something that means something. So now let's talk about our point of view on it." And we were there for a long time, and we were not talking very much. That was another layer of what meaning might be. I think the moment I realized how much as a performer I thought in the context of what I was bringing to the encounter, which you do as a performer, right? You bring your tools, whatever they are. You bring the makeup, the costume, you bring your skill, your set list, you bring all that. When I started doing medical clowning, which is where a lot of my generation and certainly the next two generations of circus performers are going for meaning. Social circus, it's called. So my wife and I started an organization 10 years ago called the Medical Clown Project. That's 12 years ago now, I think. And so as I started going there, it doesn't matter what you brought. You walk into a room and there is somebody in a bed with no legs. And now whatever you had planned doesn't look as good as you thought. So you start finding out what they're doing and making whatever magic you can from that. And it's never easy. It's the connections are deep, and you're exhausted at the end of the day, at the end of a shift. I was in the intensive care unit at a hospital, a pediatric intensive care unit. They call it the PICU. And there was a young girl. She was maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, somewhere in there. And she had those little things that take your temperature, but they put on your finger. And this was a bigger thing, and it lit up red, but it was on her toe. And we sung Rudolph the Red-Toed Reindeer, and we were rocking. She was fun. And it's in the ICU, so the parents, you could see her parents just go and breathe for the first time because their kid laughed. And, you leave and you're going, oh, man. And if you're me, you go, man, I did a good job. I rock in. And the next week I came back and I saw my friend, and she just looked at me and it was really clear, I don't want to see you. Well, the nurse told me the reason she had it on her toe, she had her arm was ready to be amputated. And the next week her arm had been amputated. Doesn't matter what you had planned.
No, it really doesn't, does it? Huh. So, what is it about? I'm sorry, the question is there. It's just taking a second to form. Um, what is it about discovering and doing what you can to alleviate pain that resonates so deeply with you?
On the first part is sort of the question embodies the answer. You're alleviating pain. You come home. When I would finish a day's shift, medical clowning, 6-7 hours, I was much more tired than a 2-show day with Cirque du Soleil. That's, and I was on stage a lot of the time. So that was a total of 5 hours on stage plus the other time there. Just been there on site for 10 hours. Coming out of the hospital much more tired because of the pain that I had been privy to, not necessarily felt. In terms of this gratitude and in terms of the learning, what I learned is a way of being as a performer that involved, yes, packing the bag. Literally, you got to pack a bag, but it can't be too big because you're schlepping it all day through the hospital, and going minimal, so it's the right things, and then saying everything I do is going to be in service of somebody else. The man who taught me about medical clowning, a guy named Ben Johnson, said, we're the only people who work in this hospital who aren't dealing with life and death. Everybody else is dealing with life and death, which means we're both privileged. We can do things that others can't, and we need to get out of the way when we're not needed fast. And there was something just so great about, because you're in the middle of your great bit and you haven't gotten the laugh, you're at the blow off, and a doctor comes in and you look at them and you go, ooh, we'll catch you later. And you're gone. He also had this thing where if there was a woman who was cleaning the rooms, orderly, I guess she would be, and we were on the rounds in pediatric, and she was just, she just seemed to be there wherever we were and not very helpful. And she was not at all impressed with us. And so I started just kind of being in the doorway when she was coming, and Ben took me aside and said, Jeff, you can't do that. Our job is to light everybody up. It's if there's anyone here in the hospital who sees us and doesn't say, oh, good, we failed. And she's not going to say, oh, good, when she sees us again. I said, yeah, but she's a pain in the ass. He goes, yeah. She's got to get those rooms cleaner. Someone's going to get an infection. What are we bringing? Okay. So the next week, I had a different partner the next week, and they brought a little piano. They'd found out that this woman had been a singer in the Ukraine where she was from, and now she was cleaning. And so they brought this tiny piano, one octave of ting, 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 and held it up. And she went, ah. And she started playing it and singing in the hall. She was a hell of a singer. So she would sing in Ukrainian. So for like 3 years when she worked on that unit, someone would have to have that toy piano and hold it up for her. To me, that cycle there, from Ben breaking my cycle of, wait, I'm working here, you're in my way, and saying, no, that's not the cycle we're in. We're in this other cycle. And then her rewarding that, extravagantly with these amazing Ukrainian songs.
I love that. Like, that to me really demonstrates kind of like or maybe the biggest or a big lesson of being here in this world. And that is, we get an idea of how things are supposed to be, and we get stuck in that idea and we start trying to act it out.
Right.
And in being stuck in that idea, we don't realize there's no awareness of the frustration or the pain or the extra whatever it be, whether it be work or just like annoyance, or that we're creating for other people around us.
Yeah. And
so then there's that aha moment, like when your buddy pulls you aside and says, if people don't see us and they go, oh good, we failed.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that whole idea that I had broke. And then all of a sudden there's room to be bigger than what you were before
Hmm.
and to grow and expand.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for telling that story.
I do have to say, as we get into the smiling part here, is that it feels horrible in the moment. I felt really bad in the. I didn't go, "Thank you, Ben. You've opened up my." I was like, "What? I'm working. I'm good at this." So I just, and it's. I've been around a long time, and I don't find that cycle changes. I have not transcended that. I just know that's me now, and I have to go through it. And just in case there are other performers listening, you also need to have an ego in order to be worth anything. In that hospital, as much as you don't go in egoless, you go in trusting that you've got the chops and the ability to be there. So it's not a matter of shrinking your ego. It's a matter of, I think, again, I'll go back to that, instead of trying to be interesting with your ego, to try to be interested with your ego. And it doesn't mean you're lesser. It ends up being that weird paradox where you get bigger. And it's fine to enjoy that, getting bigger.
Yeah, and like that, I feel like that's something that a lot of spiritual teachers miss. There's a lot of messages about, the ego is useless and like the ego is, and your goal is to get rid of the ego.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe that's one path, and maybe that works for some people, but like to me, the ego is part of the whole, and it's not about getting rid of it; it's about finding the balance in it.
Right.
That's been my experience. But yeah, I mean, if you're a professional performer and you can entirely get rid of your ego, you're not a professional performer anymore. So if your rent depends on your ego, you don't want to get. I mean, and there's people in my family who are pretty deep Buddhists and would talk about that, and I wouldn't know what to say in that conversation. I just know my experience.
Yeah, without the ego, we couldn't get up off the couch. The ego has its own function, and it's like what you're saying. It is a balance, not a, I mean, I've gone through that path where I demonized my ego, and the little child in me who's afraid, and ultimately it made me feel more small. It made me feel more shame. It's like we can't demonize our ego. We can only hold space for us to grow. I don't want to say in spite of it, but it's like there is always a lesson to learn, and it's a dance between our true and our false self. And our ego is there, like especially as a performer, there's a function of the ego that it is a dance. It is not like, look at me, look how great I am. It is like you're saying, it is back to being interested in the ego, not interesting. And
your swing dance image. I mean, when you're swing dancing and you're leading well, which is your partner's looking great and is safe, at the end you both get applause, and your partner probably gives you a little kiss on the cheek because they said that was really fun. So there's a lot of reward for the ego and for other things for being interested. It's not that. I mean, that's why you wish you heard about from me. So like, why didn't someone tell me earlier? Because it's not like, oh, I have to do this and now I get no reward. No, it's actually better.
Mm-hmm.
People are actually rather be around you because you're not a boring pain in the ass. No one bothered to mention that early on.
Yeah. Well, it's so powerful. This has been such a great conversation, Jeff. I really just appreciate you sharing your stories and the work that you do with the medical clowning, and it's so inspiring. That you're contributing to laughs and smiles, and to remind people, that there's a connection, there's a deeper connection that's possible, and you're just one of those entertainers that just reminds us how beautiful this world can be. I just really honor and appreciate you for being here.
Thank you.
And it's just been such a privilege to have you. So thank you so much. And we'd love to have you back to share more of your stories.
My pleasure. It was really fun. Thank you both. I appreciate it. Thanks for the challenging questions. You took me places I didn't plan to go.
Yes.
That's the fun part. That's the fun part. Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you again, Jeff. And thank you all at home for tuning in with us. I want to take this opportunity to invite you to share on this stage. Like Jeff, your experiences we want to hear. We want to hear what you've faced in your life, what you've experienced. What did you discover on the other side of your lonesome valley? Who did you discover yourself to be through all that you're carrying and where you were stuck, where you were lost, where you were broken, or you felt that way? What did you discover in the other side of that allowed you to thrive and to share the gift that you are with the world? We want to share the gift that you are because you are a gift and you have so much to share and benefit to us all. And really, that's what our mission here at One Day is really bringing you and me and communities together in joyous celebration, unifying humanity in our diversity to create a better world for us all. And our vision here is humanity is rising in a connected world with each person's unique gifts, genius, and contributions being valued and magnified through collaboration, producing unprecedented new realms of possibility. Thank you again, Jeff, for joining us. Thank you all at home for tuning in with us. We will see you on Thursday. I love you all. Be safe, be well, and we will see you on Thursday. And as always, one day is today. Peace, everybody.